Welcome! In this monthly podcast, I choose one theme from my life and spend some quiet time with it. I simply talk about one experience, one realization, or one thought that stayed with me. Sometimes it's about reading, journaling, or sometimes it's about time, growth, or the way we live our lives. These are reflections and they are not meant to teach or explain. This podcast is meant to be a quiet space, a place to pause, a place to think without any pressure. The very first episode, today's topic is the joy of reading. Today, I want to talk about the joy of reading. Not how to read more, not what to read, and not how to become a better reader. I want to talk about what reading has quietly been in my life and how my relationship with reading has changed over time. Reading was not always important to me. For a long time, it felt like something I could come back later when I had more time. It felt optional and it was easy to push aside. When I was younger, reading wasn't really mine, it was assigned. During summer break and winter break, we always had homework. One part of that homework was reading a book and writing a reading note. The book itself didn't matter very much. What mattered was finishing it by the deadline and writing a reading note. I remember opening a book and immediately thinking about time. How many pages are there? How many days do I have? And how fast do I need to read? When I finished the book, I didn't know what to write. So I summarized the content and one or two lines of my impression. Completing the homework was my only goal. What happened first? What happened next? How it ended? Most of my reading notes were summaries. Reading felt like a task that needed to be completed. I was thinking about what to write in the reading note rather than what I felt while reading. This was mostly true through elementary school. Later on, I did find some books that interested me, and reading slowly became a little more enjoyable. But as I grew older, schoolwork became more intense. Most of my teenage years were spent preparing for a college entrance exam in a very competitive education system, especially in Asia. Studying took up almost all of my time and energy. And I got through it and I passed through those years, but I didn't spend much time reading books freely. In college, I picked up books here and there, but reading still wasn't a central part of my life. There was one exception. I was preparing for a graduate school entrance exam and it was a very demanding time. My days were full of studying and I followed a strict schedule and measured the time carefully. And one day a friend brought me a book. It was The Bridges of Madison County. And I didn't plan to read it seriously. I just opened it. But once I started reading, I couldn't stop. Remember thinking that I should stop and go back to study, but I kept turning the pages. Minutes passed, then hours passed, and it felt like watching a movie in one sitting. The world around me faded away, and at the same time I felt conflicted. Part of me was enjoying the book deeply, another part of me was aware of the exam waiting for me. At the time, I didn't label this moment as anything special. But looking back now, I realized something did happen. I still remember the feeling of reading, the emotions, and even the atmosphere of that moment very clearly. And that feeling stayed somewhere in me. After that, my relationship with reading didn't change right away. For a long time, I misunderstood reading. I believed reading was a hobby, something you do when you have a free time. But real life rarely gives free time. There's always something urgent, something that needs attention right now. Study at work, family, or responsibilities come first. Reading is easy to push back. Even when I enjoyed reading, it stayed low on my list of priorities. If everything else was done, then maybe I would read. Most days, that moment never came. Looking back, that is the part I regret the most. not because I didn't read enough books, but because I didn't give more emphasis on reading and protect reading as part of living. I treated reading as an optional and as something extra. And second misunderstanding I had was reading had to be useful. For a long time, I felt that reading should be useful in some way. I thought the time I spent reading should lead to something clear like learning or growth. Even when I enjoyed a book, I sometimes paused and wondered whether it was meaningful enough. I wasn't being hard on myself. I was simply trying to use my time well. When a book was related to work or study, choosing it felt easy. When it wasn't, I often told myself I would read it later when I had more time. Looking back now, I see that this way of thinking made my reading life a little smaller. I didn't always give reading enough room to slow, open, or quietly enjoyable. In 2019, I read a Korean book titled 공부머리법, written by a teacher, Chae Seung-pil. It can be translated tentatively as reading builds the foundation for learning. The book talked about how reading, especially at an early age, helps build the ability to understand concepts. When reading is limited early on, it can become harder later to understand more complex subjects, especially in high school where textbooks suddenly become much more demanding. As I read, I realized that description matched my own experience. When I entered high school, I struggled with my subjects, even though I studied very hard. I put in a lot of effort, but I often felt confused. I felt like I was working harder than others just to understand what was being asked. And the author explained that students who read a lot often perform better academically, not because they are smarter, but because they understand text more easily. They don't have to spend as much energy just decoding words and sentences. Students who have not read much use more energy simply trying to understand the text itself. Because of that, they get tired faster and lose focus more easily. In highly competitive education systems, this difference becomes clear very early. When I read this, many things in my life suddenly made sense. My grades in early high school were not good, not because I didn't try, but because I was struggling to keep up with understanding. Even later, through university and graduate school, I felt like I was always working harder than others. That book helped me understand why. It wasn't that I was lacking discipline or intelligence. My reading foundation had simply been thin. That realization became a turning point in my reading journey. After that realization, I made a decision. I wanted to read more, not just for work, not just within my field. I studied computer science, and that had shaped the way I think. But I also realized how narrow my world had been. So I remember thinking, even though I'm no longer a youth, why not start now? Why not give myself a chance to read widely? So I decided to read as much as I reasonably could that year. Over about 6 months, I read 28 books across different genres in both Korean and English. And I realized I knew one area deeply, but very little about any other areas. I wanted to see a bigger picture, and I wanted to understand how ideas connect across subjects and across lives. I wanted to understand people better, history better, life better. That desire felt hot and steady. And then the pandemic came, and life slowed down in some ways. We stayed at home more, and our routines changed. During that time, I picked up more books, and something shifted. I started to enjoy reading deeply. I wanted more time to read. The only quiet time I had was very early in the morning, and before my family woke up, and before my busy day began. So I started waking up a little earlier just to read. On days when I took time off work, I read for hours. Again and again, I caught myself thinking, oh, I wish I had more time to read. That feeling surprised me. It wasn't something I planned or pushed myself into. It came naturally. Later, I looked back through my journals. I noticed something. The same sentence kept appearing again and again. I want more time to read. I want more time to read. I had written it in different moments and in different moods without really noticing at the time. That sentence wasn't a goal. It wasn't a plan either. It was simply a desire. Seeing those words repeated on the pages helped me understand how deeply I wanted to reading. So, slowly and gently, I began to change my lifestyle. Not all at once, but little by little, I started creating more space and time for reading in the years ahead. Reading as a companionship. Over time, reading started to feel like a companion in my life. I usually have a book nearby, just like my phone, journal, or my planner. Sometimes it's on my desk, sometimes it's next my bed, or sometimes it's in my bag. It doesn't mean I'm always reading. Sometimes the book just sits there. But even then, its presence matters to me. Knowing a book is within reach makes me feel a little more settled. It creates a small sense of space even on busy days. And when I do read, something gently shifts. My body slows down, and at the same time, my mind feels more awake. I read both physical books and ebooks, depending on the situation. They feel different, but both feel familiar to me. A physical book has weight. I feel the pages and I enjoy the texture of the paper. An ebook is easier to carry. It lets me read anywhere, even in short moments. And the format itself isn't very important to me. What matters is that reading is always with me. When I read, I notice that I become more present. I cannot skim endlessly the way I do on my phone. I naturally slow down. I stay with the page. I stay with the sentence. Reading becomes a moment I'm actually living, not rushing through. From the outside, it probably looks very quiet, but inside, many things are happening. Thoughts move, images appear, memories connect to what I'm reading. Reading doesn't feel passive to me. I feel involved in the moment. And when I watch a movie, the images are already there. I receive them. When I read, I create the images myself. I imagine the faces, the places, and the atmosphere. In that way, reading feels like a conversation, not something one-sided, but something happening between the book and me. Each book feels like a different road. Some books feel like walking on a rough road. I have to slow down and pay attention. Those books make me stop and think. Sometimes they feel difficult, and that's okay. I don't rush through them. Other books feel lighter, like walking through a quiet garden. I meet characters, I spend time with them, and I get to know them slowly. When I finish a book like that, I feel a quiet warmth. It feels like I have made new friends, and the book itself becomes a companion. Sometimes when I reread a book years later, I notice something interesting. The book hasn't changed, but I have. When I read it for the first time, I follow the story. When I read it again, I notice details, things happening in the background that I missed before. Rereading feels like a conversation across time between the book and different versions of myself. Reading creates a movement inside me. Thoughts appear, emotions shift. Journaling is where those things can land, if they want to. Sometimes I write a lot after reading. Sometimes I write nothing at all. Both are fine. I used to think I had to record everything. I was afraid of forgetting. But I learned that what stays is not the information. What stays is the experience of reading. So now I keep it simple. I might just record when I started and finished a book. And after that, I let myself enjoy reading and writing with complete freedom. The act of reading itself already has a value. And also, I no longer pressure myself to read in a certain way. I don't rush and I don't try to understand everything either. One page of reading is enough. One paragraph is enough. Recently, I have been thinking about going back to classics. There are many classic books whose titles I have heard again and again throughout my life, but when I look closely, I realize I have read only a few of them. In 2026, I want to take time to read those books slowly, one by one. It's not as a challenge or it's not as something I finish quickly. Sometimes I think it would have been wonderful to read them when I was younger, but I don't feel regret about that anymore. It's not too late. When I think calmly, I may still have 20 or 30 years ahead of me, and that feels like enough time. And I want to read classics at this stage of my life as a middle-aged person, and I want to meet the characters with the life experience I have now. And I want to listen to the guidance they offer from a different place and time. And I don't need to rush, and I don't need to read all of them either. And I just want to take my time, enjoy the reading, and quietly meet those great characters along the way. Reading has become a companion in my life, a quiet friend walking alongside me as my world slowly expands. The joy of reading is very quiet, but it feels steady and grounded. As long as I'm reading, I feel like I'm still in conversation with life. Thank you for listening. I hope you have your own gentle and meaningful experiences with reading. I will see you again at Moon Reading Room.